To follow the guidance of the keeper. To accept that some experiences cannot be understood through ordinary reasoning. To leave behind for the duration of your stay all claims to authority save that granted by the forest itself.
William hesitated.
Throughout his life he had signed countless documents, but something about this felt profoundly different. The quill seemed almost alive in his hand, and when he touched it to the parchment, the ink seemed to flow of its own accord. His signature appeared on the page in script far more elegant than his usual handwriting, and as the letters dried, they seemed to sink into the parchment until they became part of its very structure. Catherine followed, experiencing the same strange sensation. As her name appeared beside William's, the book began to emit a soft, warm light, and the sound they had heard earlier returned, but now it carried unmistakable welcome. "Excellent," Moira said, closing the book gently. "Now your real stay begins. Follow me." They left the heart chamber through a different exit, one that led directly into the forest itself. The moment they stepped outside, both Catherine and William felt a change so profound it was almost physical. The air seemed thicker, more alive. Colors appeared more vivid. Sounds carried meanings beyond their literal content. "Your first lesson," Moira announced, leading them down a path that seemed to appear beneath their feet as they walked, "is observation. In your world, humans see what they expect to see, hear what they expect to hear. Here, you must learn to perceive what actually is." They walked deeper into the forest than Catherine would have thought possible given the building's location. Trees towered overhead, their trunks so massive that all three of them together couldn't have encircled one with their arms. The canopy was so dense that the forest floor existed in a perpetual green twilight, yet somehow there was enough light to see clearly. "Look there," Moira pointed to what appeared to be a completely ordinary oak tree. "Tell me what you see." "A tree," William said, then felt foolish for stating the obvious. "Look closer." "Not with your eyes alone." Catherine approached the tree, extending her hand toward its bark. The moment her fingers made contact, she gasped and stepped back. "It's warm, and it's moving." "All trees move," William pointed out gently. "No, not swaying. Moving like breathing." Moira nodded approvingly. "The forest is alive in ways your scientific understanding doesn't account for. These trees communicate with each other, care for their young, remember events from decades past. Touch it again, but this time, listen with more than your ears." Catherine placed both palms against the bark, and this time, she was prepared for the warmth. What she wasn't prepared for was the voice, not words exactly, but a consciousness so vast and patient that it made her feel like a fleeting thought in an eternal mind. Images flashed through her awareness. The tree as a sapling, growing slowly through decades of seasons. Other humans who had stood in this exact spot, some seeking healing, others running from grief. The tree's deep roots connecting with every other tree in the forest, creating a network of consciousness that spanned miles. She stumbled backward, tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't have said whether they came from joy or fear. "What happened?" William asked, catching her as she swayed. "I saw, I felt. It's impossible to explain." She looked at Moira with new understanding. "They're all connected, aren't they? The entire forest is like one enormous living being." "Now you begin to understand," Moira said. "This is why the rules exist. You are not visiting a park or a garden. You are guests in the home of something ancient and powerful beyond human comprehension. Every action you take here has consequences that ripple through the entire forest consciousness." William approached the tree more cautiously. When he placed his hands against its bark, he experienced the same overwhelming sense of connection Catherine had described. But what struck him most was the feeling of being judged, not harshly, but thoroughly. The tree seemed to be reading his entire life, understanding not just his actions but his motivations, his fears, his deepest hopes. When he stepped back, he found he was trembling. How is this possible? The forest has existed in this state for longer than human civilization, Moira explained. It has learned things that your science is only beginning to discover. What you call consciousness, it has refined over millennia. What you call communication, it has perfected through networks that connect every living thing within its boundaries. They continued deeper into the forest, and with each step, both Catherine and William felt their ordinary understanding of the world shifting. Plants moved in response to their presence. Animals watched them with intelligence that went far beyond instinct. Even the air itself seemed aware, carrying messages between the trees in chemical languages older than words. "Why are we here?" Catherine asked suddenly. "I mean, really here. This wasn't random, was it?" Moira stopped walking and turned to face them. "Nothing that happens in the forest is random. You were called here because you both carry burdens that the modern world cannot heal. The forest sensed your need. What kind of burdens? William asked, though part of him already knew the answer. The weight of expectations that never ease. The pressure of living lives that belong more to your roles than to yourselves. The longing for connection with something real and lasting in a world of artificial relationships and manufactured meaning. Both Catherine and William felt the truth of her words settle into their hearts like stones dropping into still water. "Can it help?" Catherine whispered. "That depends entirely on how willing you are to let it try." As if in response to her words, the forest around them began to change. The light shifted from green to gold, and the air filled with a sound like distant music, not made by instruments but by the forest itself, creating harmony from the whisper of wind through leaves, the distant call of birds, the subtle creaking of ancient wood. For the first time in years, possibly in their entire adult lives, both Catherine and William felt completely present in a single moment, free from the weight of past and future, existing purely in the eternal now of the ancient forest. Their first lesson was complete, but they sensed it was only the beginning of something that would change them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The forest waited patiently for them to be ready for the next step in their journey toward understanding that some forms of majesty exist beyond human crowns, and some forms of power transcend anything that can be granted by governments or claimed by birthright. The third day at the Eternal Forest Retreat began with an argument. William woke before dawn, his internal clock still adjusted to London time, and found himself pacing the room while Catherine slept. The disconnect from the outside world, which had initially felt liberating, now pressed against him like a physical weight. He tried to rationalize his growing unease. Back home, dozens of people depended on his decisions. Meetings had been rescheduled, appearances postponed, duties delegated to others who shouldn't have to bear the full responsibility. The logical part of his mind understood that 7 days away wouldn't cause any irreparable damage, that a deeper part of him, the part that had been trained from birth to carry the weight of expectation, felt like he was abandoning his post. When Catherine woke, she immediately sensed his agitation. After nearly 15 years together, she could read his moods in the set of his shoulders, the particular way he held his jaw when stress was building. "You want to contact the office," she said simply. It wasn't a question. Just a quick check. 5 minutes. They could send a car, I could make some calls, handle anything urgent. William. Her voice carried a gentleness that made his pacing stop. "You signed the covenant." That was before I understood what it really meant. The words came out more harshly than he intended. "Catherine, we have responsibilities. People are counting on us." She sat up in bed, studying his face in the early morning light filtering through the ancient windows. "When was the last time you went an entire day without thinking about those responsibilities?" The question caught him off guard. He started to answer, then realized he couldn't. Even on their honeymoon, even during their most private family moments, part of his mind had always remained focused on duty, on the next obligation, the next appearance, the next crisis that might require his attention. "That's exactly the point," Catherine continued. "For once in our adult lives, we're being asked to simply be present, to exist without the weight of what everyone else needs from us." But as the morning progressed, William's agitation only grew worse. During breakfast, another meal of foods they had never tasted, served by Finn with his unnaturally knowing smile, William found himself snapping at simple questions, his usual diplomatic composure fracturing. When Moira appeared to continue their forest education, she took one look at him and shook her head. "You're fighting it." "Fighting what?"
The silence.
"The space where your constant mental noise usually lives. Your mind is so accustomed to the chaos of obligation that peace feels like abandonment." William's jaw tightened. "Ms. McLeod, I appreciate your insights, but you don't understand the nature of our responsibilities. We can't simply disappear for a week without consequences." Moira's pale green eyes seemed to look straight through him. "Your Highness, you believe your importance comes from being constantly needed. But what if that need is an addiction? What if the very thing you think makes you valuable is actually the thing that prevents you from discovering who you truly are?" The words hit him like a physical blow. William felt something rise in his chest, anger, but also something deeper and more frightening. For a moment, the careful control he had maintained his entire life wavered. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "You have no idea what it means to carry the weight of an institution, to know that millions of people depend on the decisions you make." "I know what it means to serve something greater than myself," Moira replied calmly. The difference is that I serve willingly, without ego, without the need to be constantly validated for my sacrifice.
The words struck home so directly that William actually flinched.
Around them, the forest seemed to hold its breath, as if every tree, every creature, every blade of grass was waiting to see how he would respond. I want to make a phone call, he said finally. I want to contact my security detail. I want to leave. Catherine reached for his hand, but he pulled away. The gesture was small, but in the context of their relationship, it felt like a seismic shift. William, please. No, Catherine. This was a mistake. We have real lives, real obligations. This fantasy might work for people with nothing better to do, but we can't afford to indulge in it. Moira stood silently for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. Very well.
If that is your choice, arrangements can be made. But first, you must officially withdraw your agreement to the covenant.
She led them back toward the retreat building. But instead of entering through the main doors, she took them around to a side entrance they hadn't seen before.
This door was smaller, older, carved with symbols that seemed to shift when they weren't looking directly at them. Every person who signs the covenant has the right to withdraw it, Moira explained as they descended a staircase even older than the one that led to the heart chamber. But the withdrawal must be witnessed by the forest itself. They emerged into a cavern that clearly predated the retreat building by centuries, perhaps millennia. The walls were natural stone, but carved into them were petroglyphs so ancient they seemed to pulse with their own energy. At the center of the cavern stood a pool of water so still it looked like black glass. This is the deep heart, Moira said. Here, the first humans who encountered the forest consciousness made their agreement. Here, you can break yours. The air in the cavern was different, thicker, charged with an energy that made their skin tingle. As they approached the pool, both Catherine and William could see that it wasn't empty water. Shapes moved in its depths, shadows that might have been fish or might have been something else entirely. To withdraw the covenant, Moira explained, you must state your intention to the deep heart and accept the consequences of your choice. William approached the pool's edge and immediately felt the weight of something vast and ancient, focusing its attention on him. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not hostile, but utterly neutral. Completely without human sympathy or understanding. I withdraw my agreement, he said clearly. I reject the covenant and choose to leave. The moment the words left his mouth, the cavern filled with sound. Not the harmonious forest symphony they had grown accustomed to, but something that felt like the earth itself. Groaning. In disappointment. The water in the pool began to move, creating ripples that spread outward in perfect concentric circles. As the ripples reached the pool's edge, images began to appear in the water's surface. William saw himself as a child, dutiful and eager to please, gradually transforming over the years into someone who had forgotten how to exist without the constant validation of being needed. He saw the weight of expectations settling on his shoulders like armor, protecting him but also cutting him off from genuine human connection. Most painfully, he saw Catherine, not as she appeared in public, gracious and poised, but as she truly was in their most private moments. He saw her loneliness, her own struggle with the weight of their roles, her desperate need for something real and authentic in their carefully choreographed lives. The images shifted, showing him what his insistence on leaving would mean, not just for him, but for Catherine, for their children, for everyone who looked to them for something more than duty and obligation. He saw himself growing older, more isolated, more convinced that his worth came from being indispensable, while becoming increasingly disconnected from any genuine sense of purpose or joy.
Stop, he whispered, but the images continued.
He saw Catherine years in the future, still gracious in public, but increasingly hollow in private. Their marriage surviving, but never truly thriving, because neither of them could remember how to be vulnerable, how to be present, how to be real. Stop, he said more loudly, but the deep heart wasn't finished with him. The final image was the most devastating. His own death decades in the future, surrounded by all the pomp and ceremony befitting a royal funeral, but dying with the knowledge that he had never truly lived. That he had confused being necessary with being alive, had mistaken obligation for purpose, had spent his entire existence serving something he had never taken the time to truly understand. William fell to his knees beside the pool, tears streaming down his face. The weight of recognition was crushing. Everything Moira had said, everything the forest had been trying to show him, crystallized in that moment of absolute truth. He had never learned how to exist without being needed. He had never discovered who he was, beyond his titles and duties. He was terrified that if he stopped moving, stopped performing, stopped being indispensable, he would simply cease to exist in any meaningful way. Catherine knelt beside him, her own face wet with tears. She had seen the same images, felt the same recognition. They were both drowning in their roles, had been drowning for years, and had convinced themselves that the drowning was swimming. "I don't know how to be anything else," William whispered.
I don't know who I am without the crown, without the obligations, without everyone constantly needing something from me. Moira approached them slowly, her expression soft with compassion.
That is exactly what you're here to learn. She helped them both to their feet, her touch surprisingly warm in the cold cavern.
"Your Highness, the forest doesn't ask you to abandon your responsibilities. It asks you to discover the difference between authentic service and compulsive need to be needed, between genuine leadership and the addiction to being indispensable." The images in the pool had faded, leaving only clear, still water that reflected their faces back at them. But somehow, those reflections looked different. Younger, more open, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. "I want to try again," William said quietly. "I want to learn whatever this place has to teach me." "And you, Your Highness?" Moira asked Catherine. Catherine looked into the pool, seeing her own reflection clearly for perhaps the first time in years. "I want to remember who I was before I became what everyone else needed me to be." Moira smiled, and for the first time since their arrival, her expression carried no reserve, no hidden knowledge, just pure human warmth. "Then let us return to the forest. Your real education is about to begin." As they left the deep heart cavern, both Catherine and William felt as if they were emerging from more than just underground chambers. Something had broken in that ancient space, not something in them, but something that had been constraining them. The armor of constant obligation that they had worn for so long had developed cracks, and through those cracks something authentic was finally able to breathe. The forest above welcomed them back with a susurrus of wind, through leaves that sounded remarkably like applause. Their breaking point had become their breakthrough, and the real work of remembering how to live was finally ready to begin. Behind them, the deep heart pool settled into perfect stillness, holding in its ancient memory the moment when two people who had forgotten they were human began the journey of remembering what that meant. The fourth morning at the Eternal Forest Retreat dawned differently than any before it. Catherine woke to find William already dressed and sitting quietly by the window, but instead of the agitation that had marked his previous early risings, he appeared completely at peace. His posture was relaxed, his breathing deep and even, and when he turned to greet her, she saw something in his eyes that had been missing for years: genuine presence. "How long have you been awake?" she asked, joining him at the window. "I don't know," he admitted. "Time feels different here now. I woke when I woke, and instead of immediately thinking about what needed to be done, I just existed, watched the forest wake up, listened to the birds beginning their morning songs." Catherine studied his face, noting the absence of the tension lines that had become so familiar. "You look different. I feel different." He took her hand, and she was surprised by how present the simple gesture felt. Usually, even their most intimate moments carried an undercurrent of distraction, as if part of them was always elsewhere, managing some aspect of their public lives. Yesterday changed something fundamental. When Moira appeared for their morning session, she too seemed different. The formal distance she had maintained was gone, replaced by the warmth of someone welcoming beloved friends. "Today," she announced, "you learn the forest's deepest teaching. But first, you must understand why you were truly called here." She led them deeper into the woods than they had ever gone, following paths that seemed to create themselves as they walked. The trees here were impossibly ancient, their trunks so massive that calling them merely large seemed inadequate. These were monuments to time itself, living cathedrals that had stood since before human civilization began. "Every person who finds their way to the retreat," Moira explained as they walked, "comes because the forest has sensed a particular kind of wound in them, not physical injury, but spiritual damage that can only be healed through connection with something larger than human concerns." They paused before a tree so enormous that its canopy disappeared into mist high overhead. Its bark was silver grey, marked with patterns that looked almost like writing. "This is the mother tree," Moira said with reverence. "She is the consciousness at the heart of the forest. Everything you have experienced here, the sense of being known, the feeling that your thoughts are transparent, the way the forest seems to respond to your presence, all of that flows from her awareness. Catherine approached the tree cautiously, remembering the overwhelming experience she had had touching the smaller trees earlier in their stay. But when her palms made contact with the mother tree's bark, instead of being flooded with foreign consciousness, she felt something like coming home. Images flowed through her awareness, but these were gentler than what she had experienced before. She saw herself as a child, before the weight of royal duty had begun to shape her life, when she had been simply Kate Middleton, free to dream and explore, and become whoever she chose to be. She felt the joy she had experienced in those early years with William, when their love had been private and real, before it became a public institution. But most importantly, she saw herself as she truly was now, beneath all the layers of protocol and expectation, a woman who had never stopped being that curious, hopeful child, who had simply learned to hide that authentic self so deeply that she had almost forgotten it existed. When she stepped back from the tree, tears were streaming down her face, but they were tears of recognition, not sadness. "She's beautiful," Catherine whispered. "I had forgotten I was beautiful." William approached the mother tree with none of his previous hesitation. When his hands touched the ancient bark, he felt an overwhelming sense of welcome, as if he were a long-lost child finally returning home after years of wandering. The tree's consciousness flowed through him like warm water, washing away years of accumulated stress and artificial urgency. He saw himself clearly for the first time since childhood, not as a prince or a future king, but as a man with genuine gifts to offer the world, gifts that had nothing to do with his title and everything to do with his authentic self. He saw his capacity for leadership, but leadership rooted in service rather than obligation. He saw his ability to inspire others, but inspiration born from joy rather than duty. Most remarkably, he saw his relationship with Catherine as it could be when stripped of all public performance. A partnership of two complete individuals choosing to share their lives because they genuinely delighted in each other's existence. When he stepped back from the tree, he was laughing through his tears. "I remember now," he said to Catherine. "I remember what it felt like to be myself." Moira watched them both with satisfaction. The mother tree shows each person their original face, who they were before the world taught them who they should be. But seeing is only the first step. The real teaching comes in learning to live from that authentic place. She led them to a clearing where the ancient trees formed a perfect circle. In the center grew flowers unlike any they had ever seen, not the cultivated blooms of formal gardens, but wild things that seemed to glow with their own inner light. "Sit," Moira instructed. "Close your eyes. Breathe with the forest." As they settled onto the soft grass, both Catherine and William felt the forest's consciousness surrounding them like a gentle embrace. The boundary between their individual awareness and the larger awareness of the trees began to dissolve. But instead of feeling lost or overwhelmed, they felt expanded. The forest's deepest teaching, Moira's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, is about the difference between individual power and connected power. Human civilization has forgotten this distinction, but it is the key to genuine leadership, authentic relationship, and lasting joy. As she spoke, both Catherine and William began to understand something that went beyond words. They felt how the trees in the forest maintained their individual identity while simultaneously participating in a collective consciousness. Each tree was completely itself, but also part of something infinitely larger. Individual power, Moira continued, seeks to control, to accumulate, to build barriers between self and other. It operates from fear that there is not enough recognition, not enough security, not enough love. Connected power operates from abundance, understanding that the more genuinely you become yourself, the more you have to offer others. Catherine felt a shift in her understanding so profound, it was like learning a new language. She saw how much energy she had spent trying to be perfect according to external standards, how exhausted she had become from constantly monitoring her performance instead of trusting her authentic responses to situations. William experienced a similar revelation. He understood suddenly that his fear of not being needed came from confusing his role with his identity. His value as a human being had nothing to do with his title or position. It came from the unique way he saw the world, the particular gifts he brought to relationships, the specific way his presence could contribute to others' well-being when he wasn't trying to control outcomes. "Now," Moira said softly, "open your eyes and look at each other." When Catherine and William looked across the circle at each other, what they saw took their breath away. Gone were the careful masks they had learned to wear in public. Gone was the subtle tension that had existed between them for years as they navigated the complex demands of their positions. Instead, they saw each other as they truly were, two people who had chosen to love each other, who delighted in each other's existence, who were stronger together not because they completed each other, but because they were each complete individuals choosing to share their completeness. This is how you can return to your responsibilities, Moira explained. Not as people driven by obligation or addicted to being needed, but as individuals so grounded in your authentic selves that you serve from overflow rather than emptiness. They spent the remainder of the day in the circle, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in silence, sometimes simply watching the play of light through the canopy overhead. For the first time in years, neither of them thought about schedules or obligations or the dozens of people who might be trying to reach them. Instead, they rediscovered what it felt like to be present with each other without agenda, to enjoy each other's company without purpose, beyond the simple pleasure of connection. They remembered what it felt like to laugh together without self-consciousness, to touch without performance, to exist together in the eternal now that the forest had taught them to recognize. As evening approached, Moira led them back toward the retreat building by a different path, one that wound past a series of small pools fed by a stream they hadn't noticed before. "Tomorrow is your last full day," she told them. "The forest has one final gift to offer, but it requires complete trust." Catherine felt a pang at the reminder that their stay was almost over, but it was different from the anxiety she would normally feel about returning to obligations. Instead, it was simply sadness at leaving a place where they had rediscovered something precious. "Will we be able to maintain this when we return?" William asked. "The sense of presence, of authentic connection?" Moira smiled mysteriously. "That depends entirely on your willingness to trust what you have learned here. The forest's teachings don't end when you leave its physical boundaries.
The consciousness you have touched here exists everywhere, in every moment, when you choose to be present rather than performing."
That evening, as they prepared for sleep, both Catherine and William felt as if they were different people than they had been even a day before.
The desperate quality that had marked their earlier years together was gone, replaced by a sense of abundance that made every interaction feel like a gift rather than an obligation. "I love you," Catherine said, as they settled into bed, and the words carried a weight and reality they hadn't possessed in years. "I love you too," William replied, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, the declaration was completely free of duty, expectation, or performance. Outside their window, the forest hummed with contentment, recognizing that two of its guests had successfully begun the journey of remembering what it meant to be human. The mother tree's consciousness touched theirs gently as they drifted off to sleep, holding them in its ancient awareness and preparing them for the final transformation that would complete their stay. Tomorrow would bring the forest's ultimate gift, the knowledge of how to carry its consciousness back into the world of human complexity, without losing the authentic selves they had rediscovered. But tonight, they simply rested in the peace of being exactly who they were, loved exactly as they were, complete in themselves, and therefore free to love each other without need or agenda. The forest kept watch over their sleep, dreaming with them dreams of a future where authentic presence replaced performed perfection, where service flowed from joy rather than obligation, where love existed as abundance rather than scarcity. In the depths of the mother tree's consciousness, two more souls had been restored to themselves, ready to return to their world not as perfect performers, but as authentic human beings who had remembered the difference. The seventh and final morning at the Eternal Forest Retreat arrived with a symphony unlike any Catherine and William had heard during their stay. Every bird, every insect, every whisper of wind through the ancient branches seemed to be participating in a farewell song that was both celebration and benediction. They woke not to alarm clocks or the urgent needs of others, but to the natural rhythm of their own bodies, finally synchronized with something deeper than human schedules. For the first time in years, possibly decades, both felt completely rested, not just physically but spiritually restored to a state of being they had forgotten was possible. Moira appeared for the final time not as their guide or teacher, but as what she had always been beneath those roles, a friend who would help them remember themselves. "Today," she announced, "the forest offers its ultimate gift. But first you must understand what you will be carrying back to your world." She led them once more to the mother tree, but this time the ancient giant was not alone. Throughout the clearing, other trees had somehow moved closer, creating an intimate circle of living witnesses. The air itself seemed thick with presence, as if every consciousness in the forest had gathered to participate in this final ceremony. "What you have learned here," Moira began, "is not separate from your responsibilities in the outer world. The forest has not taught you to escape your duties, but to transform your relationship with them. You are returning not as different people, but as the same people you always were beneath the layers of expectation and performance." Catherine approached the mother tree and placed her hands on its bark one last time. Instead of the overwhelming flood of consciousness she had experienced before, she felt something like a gentle download of information, not facts or instructions, but a deep knowing about how to maintain her connection to this authentic self regardless of external circumstances. She understood that the peace she had found here wasn't dependent on being in the forest. It was dependent on remembering that beneath every role she played, every public appearance she made, every moment of scrutiny she endured, there existed an unchanging core of self that no external circumstance could touch. When William touched the tree, he received his own understanding. He saw how his future leadership could flow from this place of authentic presence rather than compulsive need. He understood that true authority came not from position or title, but from the ability to remain genuinely himself regardless of what others projected onto him. Most importantly, he saw how he and Catherine could support each other in maintaining this authentic connection, even when the demands of their public lives threatened to pull them back into performance mode. The forest's final gift, Moira explained as they stepped back from the mother tree, is the knowledge that this consciousness exists everywhere, not just here. Every tree, every natural space, every moment when you choose presence over performance offers you access to the same peace you have found here. She led them to the edge of the clearing where a simple stone altar had been erected. On it lay two objects Catherine and William had never seen before, stones that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, carved with symbols that shifted and changed as they watched. These are anchor stones, Moira explained. They carry within them a fragment of the forest's consciousness. When the demands of your outer life threaten to pull you back into old patterns of performance and compulsion, hold these stones and remember what you have learned here. Catherine picked up one of the stones and immediately felt the familiar warmth of the forest's presence. It was like carrying a piece of home, a tangible reminder that the peace she had found was real and accessible, regardless of where she might be. William's stone felt different in his hands, not lighter or heavier than an ordinary rock, but somehow more present, as if it contained within its simple form all the wisdom the forest had shared with them. But these are just reminders, Moira cautioned. The real anchor is your commitment to remaining present in each moment, to choosing authenticity over performance, to serving from abundance rather than emptiness. As they prepared to leave the clearing, both Catherine and William felt an unexpected emotion, not sadness at leaving, but excitement about returning to their world with what they had learned. For the first time in years, they felt genuinely eager to engage with their responsibilities, not from obligation, but from joy at having something real to offer. The walk back to the retreat building took them through parts of the forest they hadn't seen before, as if the trees themselves were offering a final gift of beauty to mark their departure. Ancient groves opened before them like natural cathedrals, streams appeared to provide moments of reflection, and wildlife emerged to bid them farewell. At the retreat building, their belongings were already packed and waiting by their car. But instead of the usual efficiency of departure, everything felt ceremonial, sacred. Finn appeared with a final meal, bread and honey, and water that seemed to glow with their own inner light. As they ate, Catherine and William realized they were participating in a communion that connected them not just to the forest, but to every person who had ever found healing in this place. Others will come after us, Catherine observed. Others who have forgotten who they are beneath their roles. Moira nodded. The forest calls those who are ready to remember. Your transformation here will ripple outward in ways you cannot imagine. People will sense the change in you and be drawn to their own healing. As they finished their meal, William felt compelled to ask the question that had been building in him since their first day. Who are you really, Moira? How do you maintain such peace while living in constant service to others? Moira's smile carried depths of understanding that spoke of her own journey to this place. I learned the same lesson you have learned, Your Highness. I discovered that serving something greater than myself is not a burden when it flows from authentic choice rather than compulsive need. The forest chose me as its keeper not because I was perfect, but because I was willing to become real. The time for departure had arrived, but neither Catherine nor William felt the usual anxiety that marked the end of their retreats from public life. Instead, they felt complete, ready to return to their world carrying something precious and transformative. Their goodbye to Moira was brief but profound. Words seemed inadequate to express what had transpired between them, so they simply embraced, and in that simple human contact, acknowledged the miracle of recognition that occurs when people meet each other in complete authenticity. The drive away from the retreat felt like moving between worlds. As they left the forest boundaries, both Catherine and William braced themselves for the inevitable return of external pressures. But, to their amazement, the peace they had found remained intact. Their phones, reconnecting to cell towers for the first time in a week, immediately began buzzing with accumulated messages, missed calls, and urgent requests for attention. But instead of the familiar spike of anxiety these notifications usually triggered, both felt only curiosity about how they could serve whatever needs had arisen during their absence.
"Look at us," Catherine marveled as William calmly scrolled through his messages. "A week ago, this would have sent us both into panic mode." William smiled, and the expression carried a lightness that had been absent for years. "I keep expecting to feel guilty about being away, but all I feel is grateful. For the first time in my life, I actually want to engage with these responsibilities." Their security detail met them at the edge of the village, professional and relieved to have their charges back under protection. But even these familiar faces seemed different now. Not because they had changed, but because Catherine and William were seeing them as individual human beings, rather than extensions of their royal machinery.
The drive back to London passed in comfortable conversation about practical matters, which events they needed to prioritize, how to handle the inevitable questions about their retreat, what adjustments they might want to make to their schedules. But underneath these surface discussions ran a deeper current of connection that felt entirely new. They were no longer two people drowning together in the weight of their responsibilities. They were two individuals who had rediscovered their authentic selves and chosen to share those selves in service of something larger than their personal comfort. When Kensington Palace came into view, Catherine felt none of the familiar dread that usually marked the return from private time. Instead, she felt curiosity about how she could bring her newly rediscovered authentic self to the relationships and responsibilities waiting for her. Their children rushed to greet them, and both Catherine and William were struck by how present they felt during these reunions. Instead of part of their attention being immediately pulled towards the accumulated work waiting for them, they were completely available to the joy of their children's excitement, the simple pleasure of family connection. "You look different," their eldest observed with the uncanny perceptiveness of children. "Happier." "We had a very peaceful week," Catherine replied, and realized that for once, her diplomatic response was also completely truthful. Over the following days and weeks, everyone in their orbit noticed the change. Staff members found themselves dealing with royals who were more decisive but less demanding, more focused but less driven by anxiety. Public appearances carried a new quality of genuine engagement that left audiences feeling they had encountered something real rather than performed. Catherine discovered that she could engage fully with her royal duties while maintaining perfect access to the peaceful centre she had rediscovered at the retreat. The anchor stone Moira had given her lived in her pocket, a tangible reminder of her authentic self, but she found she rarely needed to touch it. The peace had become internal, unshakable. William found that his leadership style transformed almost overnight. Instead of making decisions from anxiety about potential criticism, he began choosing courses of action based on what felt genuinely aligned with his values. The difference in effectiveness was remarkable, not just for him, but for everyone who worked with him. Most importantly, their relationship with each other continued to deepen in ways that surprised them both. Free from the compulsive need to be needed that had characterized their earlier years, they could appreciate each other's uniqueness without trying to complete or fix anything. They had become what Moira had shown them was possible, two complete individuals choosing to share their completeness. 6 months after their return from the Eternal Forest retreat, Catherine and William received another invitation on the same elegant parchment. But this time, instead of summoning them back for healing, it was inviting them to serve. "Others have been called," the message read simply. "Your transformation has created ripples. The forest asks if you would consider helping guide the next visitors who need to remember themselves." As they read the invitation together, both felt the same response, not obligation or duty, but joy at the opportunity to offer others what had been so freely given to them. They returned to the retreat, not as guests seeking healing, but as people who had learned the difference between individual power and connected power, ready to serve from abundance rather than emptiness. The forest welcomed them back like old friends, the mother tree's consciousness embracing them with the recognition that they had successfully carried her teachings into the world without losing what they had found. Moira greeted them with satisfaction, seeing in their faces the completion of a transformation that had begun with their desperate need for escape and culminated in their joyful willingness to serve. "Now you understand," she said simply. "Deep in the heart of Scotland's most remote highlands lies a place where even royalty cannot bend the rules. The Eternal Forest Retreat has stood for over 2 centuries, its ancient stone walls harboring secrets that governments have tried to suppress and wealthy elites have failed to purchase their way around. This is not a tale of privilege opening doors,
or money buying exceptions. This is the story of how Catherine, the Princess of Wales, and Prince William discovered that some boundaries exist beyond the reach of crowns and titles. When the couple arrived at the retreat's imposing iron gates on a fog-shrouded morning in October 2023, they believed their royal status would grant them the same courtesies they had grown accustomed to worldwide. They were about to learn that within these ancient woods, different laws apply. Laws written not by parliaments or kings, but by something far older and more unforgiving. What happened during their 7-day stay would challenge everything they thought they knew about power, privilege, and the natural world. Some rules they discovered cannot be broken, not by anyone, not for any reason, and certainly not by those who have spent their lives believing themselves above ordinary limitations. This is their story. This is the truth about the place where even princes must bow to forces greater than themselves. The Black Range Rover wound its way through the narrow Scottish Highlands road, its occupants growing increasingly silent as civilization fell further behind them. Prince William gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his knuckles white against the leather. In the passenger seat, Catherine gazed out at the endless expanse of ancient pines that seemed to press closer to the road with each passing mile. "Are you certain about this place?" Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The GPS had lost signal 20 minutes ago, and they were now following handwritten directions provided by William's private secretary. William nodded, though uncertainty flickered in his blue eyes. Harry recommended it, said it was the only place he'd ever found complete peace. His younger brother had been notably vague about the details, mentioning only that the Eternal Forest Retreat was unlike anywhere else on Earth. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks prior, written on thick parchment paper in elegant script. It bore no official letterhead, no government seal, and no indication of who had extended the invitation. Simply an address, dates, and a single line, "Their Royal Highnesses are expected." The presumption had irritated William initially, but Catherine had been intrigued by the mystery. As they rounded another bend, the forest suddenly opened into a clearing, and before them stood the Eternal Forest Retreat. The building defied easy description. Part medieval castle, part modern lodge. It seemed to have grown from the earth itself. Moss-covered stone walls rose 3 stories high, punctuated by windows that gleamed like dark eyes in the afternoon light. Ancient oak trees towered over the structure, their branches so dense they created a natural cathedral ceiling hundreds of feet above. "It's magnificent," Catherine breathed, though something in the building's presence made her shiver despite the warm October day. They parked beside the only other vehicle in sight, a battered Land Rover that looked as though it had weathered decades of highland storms. As they gathered their luggage, the retreat's front door opened with a sound like wind through dry leaves. A woman emerged who appeared to be in her 60s, though her posture and movements suggested someone much younger. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and she wore simple grey clothing that seemed to blend with the stones of the building. Most striking were her eyes, pale green, almost translucent, as if reflecting the forest itself. "Your Royal Highnesses," she said, her voice carrying a slight Scottish accent. "I am Moira MacLeod, the keeper of this place. You are expected." William stepped forward, extending his hand in the practiced gesture of royalty meeting commoners. "Ms. MacLeod, thank you for having us. I must say your retreat is quite isolated." Moira looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment before shaking it briefly. Her touch was surprisingly cold. "Isolation is necessary here, Your Highness. The outside world has a way of corrupting what we protect." She turned to Catherine with the same measuring gaze. "Welcome, Your Royal Highness. I trust your journey was not too difficult." "Please, call us William and Catherine," the princess said with her characteristic warmth. "We're hoping to escape formality for a few days." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Moira's features. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. Here, proper respect must be maintained at all times, though perhaps not in the way you're accustomed to." She gestured toward the building. "Please, allow me to show you to your quarters. We have much to discuss about your stay." They followed her through the massive oak doors into an entry hall that took Catherine's breath away. The ceiling soared 30 feet overhead, supported by ancient beams that must have come from trees larger than any that grew in Britain today. Tapestries covered the walls, depicting scenes of forests and wildlife, with such detail they seemed almost alive in the flickering light of wall-mounted torches. "How old is this place?" William asked, his architectural training evident in the way he studied the construction. "The first stones were laid in 1823, Moira replied, leading them down a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced individuals. Though something sacred has existed on this site for far longer, the Druids knew of its power, the Romans feared it.
We simply maintain it. Catherine paused before one of the portraits, a man with the same pale green eyes as Moira. Are these previous keepers? Every keeper since the founding. The position passes through bloodlines, never through appointment or election. Moira's tone suggested this was not open for discussion. The forest chooses who will serve. They climbed a stone staircase worn smooth by nearly 2 centuries of footsteps. Their rooms were on the second floor, a suite that would have been considered luxurious in any 5-star hotel, yet something about the space felt different. The furniture was handcrafted from local wood. The linens were the finest quality, but there was an absence of modern conveniences that Catherine noticed immediately. No televisions, she observed. No phones, no internet, no connection to the outside world during your stay. Moira confirmed. These are the rules. They apply to everyone. William's diplomatic training kicked in. I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm afraid that's not possible. We have security protocols, government responsibilities. Your security detail has been accommodated in the village 12 miles away. Moira interrupted smoothly. They understand the arrangements. As for government responsibilities, you informed your officers that you would be unreachable for 7 days. The retreat does not make exceptions. The certainty in her voice was unsettling. How could you possibly know our arrangements? Catherine asked. The forest knows what it needs to know. Moira moved to the window, which looked out over an expanse of trees that seemed to stretch to the horizon. You came here seeking peace, did you not? Escape from the pressures of your positions? That cannot be achieved while maintaining the very connections you seek to escape. William felt his temper rising, a reaction that surprised him. He was accustomed to having his wishes accommodated, even when visiting foreign countries. MacLeod, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We appreciate your philosophy, but we cannot be completely cut off. Moira turned from the window, and for a moment her pale eyes seemed to reflect something wild and ancient. Your Highness, you are no longer in the world of protocols and exceptions. You have entered a place governed by older laws. Here, you will follow the rules, or you will leave. There is no third option. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Catherine felt goosebumps rise on her arms, though the autumn afternoon remained warm. And if we choose to leave? William asked, his voice steady despite the strange atmosphere. Then you leave, Moira said simply. The forest will not hold you against your will, but if you stay, you accept its terms completely. Catherine and William exchanged glances. They had faced diplomatic challenges, public scrutiny, and personal tragedies, but this was entirely outside their experience. Yet something about the place, something beyond the obvious beauty and mystery, compelled them to remain. We'll stay, Catherine said quietly, and William nodded his agreement. Good. Moira's expression softened slightly. Dinner is served at 7. Dress simply. The forest has no use for finery. Until then, rest. Tomorrow, your real stay begins. After she left, Catherine and William stood in silence for several minutes. Through the window, they could see the ancient trees swaying in a breeze that seemed to carry whispers in a language neither of them recognized. The retreat's true purpose is not to provide escape from the world, but to prepare people to return to the world as agents of healing. As they settled into their new roles as guides for future guests, both Catherine and William understood that their education at the Eternal Forest Retreat was not ending, but evolving. They had learned to be real instead of perfect, present instead of performing, abundant instead of needy. Most importantly, they had discovered that some rules truly cannot be broken, not because they are imposed by external authority, but because they reflect the fundamental truth of what it means to be authentically human. Even princes and princesses, they had learned, must bow to the deeper laws of consciousness, presence, and authentic service. The forest had taught them that real majesty comes not from titles or positions, but from the courage to be completely yourself in service of something greater than your individual concerns. It was a lesson that would serve them for the rest of their lives, and through them touch countless others who would learn that healing is always possible when we remember who we truly are beneath our roles and performances. In the ancient consciousness of the Mother Tree, their story joined the stories of all who had found their way to authentic presence in a world of artificial performance. The retreat continued its quiet work of healing, one soul at a time, proving that some transformations ripple outward in ways that can change the world. What have we gotten ourselves into? Catherine murmured. William put his arms around her, but his embrace felt different here, less certain, more protective. I don't know, but I have the strangest feeling that we're about to find out. Outside their window, the forest waited with the patience of something that had watched the rise and fall of empires. secure in the knowledge that even princes and princesses were merely visitors in its ancient domain. The rules had been established long before crowns were invented, and they would endure long after the last palace crumbled to dust.
As the afternoon light filtered through the canopy, painting everything in shades of gold and green, Catherine felt a shift in her perception. For the first time in years, perhaps in her entire adult life, she was truly unknown, truly without special status or consideration. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Deep in the forest, something ancient stirred, aware that new guests had arrived. Guests who would learn, as all others had before them, that some boundaries exist beyond the reach of human ambition, and some rules cannot be bent by any earthly power. Their education was about to begin. Dawn came differently at the Eternal Forest Retreat. Instead of the gradual lightening Catherine was accustomed to at Kensington Palace, here the forest seemed to exhale the night and breathe in the day all at once. She woke to find pale green light filtering through the ancient windows, carrying with it the sound of birdsong unlike any she had heard before. William was already awake, standing at the window with a puzzled expression. "Listen to that," he said softly as she joined him. The forest was alive with sound, but not the chaotic noise of modern life they had grown used to. Instead, it was as if every creature, from the smallest insect to the largest bird, was participating in a coordinated symphony. The effect was hypnotic, almost otherworldly. "It's beautiful," Catherine whispered, though she felt an odd reluctance to speak louder, as if raising her voice might somehow disturb the natural harmony. A soft knock at their door interrupted the moment. When William opened it, they found a young man perhaps 20 years old, with the same distinctive pale green eyes as Moira MacLeod. He carried a tray with what appeared to be breakfast. "Good morning, Your Highnesses," he said with a slight bow. "I'm Finn MacLeod, Moira's nephew. I'll be assisting you during your stay. Breakfast is served, though I should mention that all meals here are taken from what the forest provides." The tray contained fresh bread that smelled of herbs Catherine couldn't identify, honey that seemed to glow with its own inner light, berries that looked like nothing she had seen in any market, and water that was so clear it seemed almost crystalline. "This looks wonderful," Catherine said, accepting the tray. "Though I must admit, I'm curious about those berries." Finn's serious expression broke into a smile that transformed his young face entirely. "Rowan berries specially prepared. They grow nowhere else quite like they do here. The soil, you see, it's different. Everything that grows in this forest carries a bit of its magic." William raised an eyebrow. "Magic? Perhaps that's not the right word," Finn conceded, though his eyes suggested he meant exactly what he had said. "Energy might be more accurate. The forest has been undisturbed for over 2 centuries. Plants and animals here have evolved differently, away from the influence of the modern world. After breakfast, Moira appeared to begin what she called their orientation. She led them down a different staircase than the one they'd climbed the previous evening, this one descending into what appeared to be the building's foundation level. "Every guest must understand the rules before they can truly begin their stay," she explained as they walked through corridors carved directly from living rock. "These are not suggestions or guidelines. They are absolute requirements for anyone who wishes to remain." They emerged into a circular chamber that took their breath away. The room was carved from solid stone, but its walls were covered with symbols and writing that seemed to shift in the torchlight. At the center stood a table made from a single massive tree trunk, its surface polished to a mirror finish. "This is the heart chamber," Moira said, her voice carrying a reverence that made both Catherine and William pay closer attention. "Here, the first keeper established the covenant between human guests and the forest itself. Every person who stays at the retreat must acknowledge this covenant." Catherine approached the table and gasped. Carved into its surface were hundreds of names, dating back nearly 2 centuries. Some she recognized from history books. Writers, artists, political figures who had disappeared from public life for periods and returned changed. Others were completely unknown. "What kind of covenant?" William asked, his legal training making him wary of any binding agreement. Moira walked to the far side of the chamber where an ancient book rested on a stone lectern. The binding was leather, but leather unlike anything they had seen. It seemed to pulse with life, and the metal clasps appeared to be made from some unknown alloy that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. "The forest," Moira began, opening the book carefully, "has existed in this form since long before humans walked the earth. It has consciousness, memory, purpose. When the first keeper established this retreat, it was not as a master claiming dominion, but as a servant acknowledging a greater power."
She turned the book so they could see the pages. The writing was in multiple languages, some recognizable, others that seemed to predate any known alphabet. The covenant is simple, Moira continued. Those who enter the forest with respect and humility will find peace, healing, and wisdom beyond measure. But those who attempt to impose their will, who believe their human concerns supersede the forest's ancient laws, will find themselves challenged. Challenged how? Catherine asked, though part of her wasn't certain she wanted to know. Before Moira could answer, a sound echoed through the chamber. Not quite a growl, not quite a voice, but something that seemed to come from the very stones around them. Both Catherine and William felt it more than heard it, a vibration that seemed to resonate in their bones. The forest is aware of you, Moira said calmly, as if supernatural sounds in underground chambers were perfectly normal.
It is.
Evaluating your intentions. William's diplomatic instincts kicked in, but something about the situation made his usual approaches feel inadequate. Ms. MacLeod, we came here seeking peace and privacy. We have no intention of imposing anything on anyone or anything. The sound came again, this time with what might have been approval, though neither of them could say how they knew that. Moira smiled, the expression making her appear decades younger. Good. The forest hears truth, even when humans themselves are not fully aware of it. You may sign the covenant. She produced a quill that appeared to be made from the feather of some enormous bird, its surface shimmering with an oily rainbow sheen. The ink was dark red, almost black, and seemed to move within its container. What exactly are we agreeing to? Catherine asked, reading the covenant text that appeared to be written in English, though the words seemed to shift slightly when she wasn't looking directly at them. To respect the forest and its inhabitants. Inside the eternal forest retreat, the unyielding rule, even Catherine and William cannot escape.